I found out on my husband's phone that he was having an affair with my sister, and my family still took their side. My husband left his phone face up on the kitchen table while he took the trash out, and I only picked it up because it started buzzing so hard against the wood that my coffee rippled. I thought it was one of his work messages. I thought it was another reminder about some invoice or a customer or one of those annoying little things that always seemed to need him right when we sat down to eat. Instead, I saw my younger sister's name on the screen, followed by a message that made my whole body go cold in a weird, slow way, like I had stepped into bad water and my brain had not caught up yet. It said, "Delete our thread after you get home. She notices everything lately." There are moments when your life splits cleanly in half, and that was one of mine. My name is Marin, and before that message I was a tired wife in a small American city stretching groceries, helping with our cake business, and pretending my family was messy in the normal way. After that message, I was a woman standing in a kitchen with cheap tile and frosting bowls, staring at a phone that suddenly felt radioactive in my hand. I wish I could tell you I put it back down and confronted him like some composed adult from a therapist's brochure. I didn't. I opened the message. Then I opened the whole thread. Then I kept going even when my hands started shaking so badly I had to hold the phone with both of them. It was not one flirty joke. It was not one bad night. It was weeks and then months of it, hidden inside normal family life like a knife wrapped in a dish towel. There were inside jokes about me. There were photos taken in places I recognized. There were messages sent while I was in the next room. There was one from my sister that said she hated hearing me talk about baby names before we had even started trying, because she always gets everything first. Which was funny because if you asked my mother, my sister had been getting everything first since birth. There was another from him saying he couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if they just told the truth and let me be dramatic about it for a while. Let me be dramatic. I swear to you, that phrase did something permanent to my nervous system. By the time he came back inside, I had already sent screenshots to my own email, forwarded some to a secret folder, and wiped tears off my face with the back of my hand like that would somehow make me look normal. He walked in carrying the trash bag smell with him and asked why I looked pale. I said I had a headache, which was technically true, if we define headache as your marriage turning into a crime scene in your head. That night I didn't sleep. I lay next to him while he snored and did that thing where one arm flops across the bed like he owned peace itself, and I went through every strange moment from the last year. My sister coming over too often, my husband volunteering to drive her home, my mother telling me I was insecure when I said their energy felt off, my father shrugging like men always do when women are clearly on fire right in front of them. Tiny things, gross little things, the kind you explain away because otherwise you would have to admit your own life is humiliating. For 3 weeks, I turned into someone I did not recognize. I smiled through Sunday dinners. I helped package cupcakes for baby showers and office parties. I answered my sister's calls and listened to her complain about women she knew from work, all while she was sleeping with my husband behind my back. I took screenshots every chance I got. If he left his phone in the bathroom, I checked it. If he showered, I copied what I could remember after. I kept everything organized by date in a folder labeled tax receipts, because irony was clearly the only thing holding me together at that point. The only person I told was my friend from high school. The one person in my life who had seen me ugly cry in parking lots and still answered my calls. She sat in my car with me outside our apartment one night, holding a fast food soda she forgot to drink, and said, "I need you to hear me. If you say the word, I will help you leave. If you say a different word, I will help you ruin them too." That was probably not healthy advice, but it was honest, and honestly was in short supply then. A week later, she helped me follow him. I'm not proud of that, but I'm also not pretending I wouldn't do it again. He said he was meeting a supplier across town. My friend and I sat 2 cars back in silence so thick it felt like church. He drove out toward the highway, pulled into one of those roadside places that rents rooms by the night and pretends the glowing sign makes it classy, and 10 minutes later my sister's car slid into the lot beside his. I took pictures of them walking in. I took pictures of them coming out 2 hours later with her hair messed up and his hand on her lower back like they were starring in the world's trashiest love story. When I finally confronted him, I printed everything, every screenshot, every photo, every disgusting little joke. I spread it all across our dining table on a Tuesday night while my mother was supposed to be coming over to taste test fillings for a family order. He walked in, saw the table, and stopped so hard I actually heard his keys hit the floor. My sister was behind him because of course she was. My mother arrived 3 minutes later, saw the papers, and still somehow acted like I was the one creating a scene. I asked him one question. I asked if he loved her. No screaming at first, no thrown plates, just that. He looked at my sister, then at me, and said yes in the saddest, stupidest, calm voice I have ever heard. Like he was announcing rain, like honesty itself deserved credit. My sister started crying immediately, which would have been funny if I hadn't wanted to pass out. My mother rushed to comfort her before either of us even breathed again. And that told me everything I needed to know about how the next part of my life was going to go. You would think a mother seeing proof that one daughter had slept with the other daughter's husband would produce at least one clean moment of moral clarity. Not in my family. My mother sat at my table, pressed both hands together like she was about to lead prayer, and said this was tragic for everybody. Everybody. As if we had all simply slipped on the same banana peel together. My sister kept crying into her sleeves and saying she had not meant for it to happen like this, which is such a fascinating sentence when you have been sneaking around motel parking lots. My husband stood there with his jaw tight like he had been wronged by my print settings. Then my father showed up because my mother had called him on the way over. He looked at the papers, rubbed the back of his neck, and asked if there was any chance we could all calm down before the neighbors heard. That was his contribution. Not, what did you do to your daughter? Not, what kind of man betrays his wife with her sister? Just volume control. I laughed. I actually laughed in his face, and I think that was the moment I stopped hoping my family would ever surprise me in a good way. Things got uglier fast. My sister said she had fallen in love. My husband said our marriage had been bad for a while, which was news to me because he had still been letting me wash his work shirts and plan our holiday orders like we were some hard-working little team. My mother said my sister had always been more emotional and more fragile, and that I needed to be careful not to punish her for one mistake. One mistake. Again, the language in that room could have qualified for its own restraining order. I told them both to get out. My husband asked where he was supposed to go. I told him he seemed resourceful lately. My sister tried to touch my arm. I pulled away so fast she flinched. My mother said I was being cruel. I said, good. Finally, something around here is accurate. The next few weeks felt like being dragged behind my own life. My husband went to stay with my parents because apparently there is no stronger family value than enabling a man who sleeps with your other daughter. My sister kept showing up there too. I know because neighbors told me and because my mother, in one of the more offensive calls of my lifetime, actually suggested the four of us sit down and talk through the practical side of the situation since everyone had feelings. I hung up on her so hard my phone case cracked. The legal side was simple in the sad, broke people version of simple. We did not own some giant estate. We had a small house with too much mildew in the bathroom, a used car that was mostly his, and a little custom baking business we had built out of my recipes and his delivery routes. The business part hurt almost more than the marriage, if I am honest, because the cakes were mine first. The long nights were mine. The designs were mine. But the licenses and the account were under both names because I had believed in partnership, back when I still had that disease. My lawyer was a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain who looked at my stack of screenshots and said very dryly, well, at least they made this easy. I liked her immediately. She told me not to get heroic, not to cling to the house just because it carried emotional weight, and not to assume my family would come around in time. People don't magically become decent because you are devastated, she said. I wanted to tattoo that on my forehead. The divorce moved faster than I expected because he was eager to be free and, according to mutual acquaintances, eager to prove this was all some grand romantic truth instead of what it obviously was. My sister started spending nights at my parents' place more openly. My mother started talking about them like they were a complicated but real couple, which made me briefly consider faking my own death and moving into a lighthouse. I sold the house. I liquidated my share of the business. I took less than I probably should have because I wanted out more than I wanted to fight. That is one of those choices people love to judge when it is not their nervous system on the line. I know I could have dragged things out. I know I could have squeezed harder. But every extra week tied to him felt like drinking poison in little managed sips. I wanted air. I wanted silence. I wanted one room in the world that did not smell like him or my mother's excuses. My friend helped me pack. She wrapped cake pans in old towels and cursed under her breath every time she picked up something he had touched too often. I cried over absurd things. A wooden spoon, a grocery list magnet, the cheap little stool I used to stand on when I iced tall cakes. Grief is humiliating like that. It does not show up in noble places. It shows up in a half-empty spice rack and a drawer full of rubber bands. About 4 months after everything blew up, while the divorce was still being finalized, I left. I had a little over $20,000 after fees and what was left of the sale, which was not much but still felt like possibility. I moved to a bigger American city 2 states away because I needed somewhere my mother could not drop by, and where every cashier did not know my business. My friend drove the rental truck with one hand and handed me fries with the other, while I sat in the passenger seat trying not to throw up from equal parts stress and cheap road coffee. I wish I could say the move fixed me. It didn't. It just gave me space to fall apart in private. I rented a small apartment over a hair salon where the pipes knocked all night and the stairs smelled like old bleach. I found work at a commercial bakery because they needed someone who could decorate fast without acting precious about it. And I was apparently very qualified to be exhausted and quiet. I came home every night with aching wrists and sugar in the cuffs of my clothes. I watched videos on my laptop about advanced techniques and pricing and food safety updates. Because the one thing betrayal did not kill in me was the part that wanted to build something of my own again. Then a few weeks after the move, I stood in my bathroom holding a drugstore pregnancy test and laughed so hard I scared myself. It was not happy laughter. It was that weird edge-of-a-cliff laughter your body makes when it cannot process one more thing. I took another test. Same result. I sat on the closed toilet with both sticks in my hand and thought, of course. Of course this would happen after I finally got away. Of course he would leave one more thing behind in my body on his way out. I did not tell him. I know some people will hear that and decide I am the villain in their version. Fine. They can start a club with my mother. At that point, he was living openly with my sister, being defended by my parents and pretending the last few years of my life were just collateral damage on his way to true love. I did not want his money. I did not want his name on my child's paperwork. Mostly, I did not want him near me ever again. So I made the decision alone, which sounds stronger than it felt. Really, it felt like sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against a cabinet, whispering okay to nobody. Okay, I would do this. Okay, I would keep the apartment. Okay, I would work as long as I could. Okay, I would become the kind of woman who knew how to be left and still keep moving. I was terrified, obviously. I was also weirdly calm. Sometimes once the worst thing happens, your body gets practical out of spite. Pregnancy after betrayal is such a weird private thing. People love to treat pregnancy like a glowing miracle or a neat consequence, but for me it was nausea on a bus ride to work, fear every time I paid rent, and that constant low-grade panic of realizing there was nobody to split anything with. I worked through most of it because I did not have a rich aunt hiding in the walls. I decorated sheet cakes for office birthdays while trying not to gag at industrial vanilla. I smiled at managers. I counted tips from side orders. I took freelance cookie jobs on weekends from people who found me through coworkers. By the end of each day, my ankles looked inflated and my brain felt packed with wet cotton. The only steady help I had came from the woman downstairs in the salon. She had 2 grown daughters, a smoker's voice, and the kind of blunt kindness that keeps you alive without making a big speech about it. She noticed I was pregnant before I told anyone because apparently I started crying in the hallway over a broken grocery bag. She marched me into her apartment, fed me toast, and said, "You're not doing this totally alone now, whether you like it or not." I did like it, actually. I just did not know how to admit I needed anybody. I told my parents eventually, mostly because if a person is going to hear through gossip, it might as well not arrive with extra seasoning. My mother's first question was whether the baby was definitely my ex-husband's, which was interesting because she had never brought that same moral skepticism to her other daughter's motel habits. My father asked if I was safe. That was probably the kindest thing he had said to me in months, and it still felt thin. My sister did not speak to me directly, but I heard through a cousin that she was offended I had not shared the news sooner. Offended. Imagine cheating with your sister's husband and then feeling excluded from her reproductive updates. The confidence some people walk around with should be studied. I kept the pregnancy as quiet as I could. No photo shoots, no elaborate announcements, no nursery reveal with little wooden signs. It was me, a secondhand crib, free online classes, and a notebook full of math that never added up kindly. There were nights I lay awake counting future expenses like prayer beads, daycare, formula if I could not breastfeed enough, medical bills, shoes for a child not even born yet. I got very practical, which is another way of saying I did not let myself think too far emotionally because I was scared if I started, I would not stop. When labor started, I was frosting a set of trial cupcakes in my kitchen for a woman who wanted something elevated but playful, which remains one of the more annoying phrases I have ever been paid to hear. I thought at first it was just back pain from standing too long. Then my water broke all over my socks, and suddenly the downstairs woman was grabbing her keys while I tried to remember where I had put my hospital folder. My son arrived after a long, ugly night that involved swearing, crying, and one nurse telling me to breathe in a tone that made me want to fight her. The second they put him on my chest, I felt 2 things at once. A wave of love so sharp it scared me, and grief so deep I could barely breathe around it. Not because of my ex. He was irrelevant by then. Because I understood all at once how much this little person would need from me, and how much I needed my life to become steadier than it had ever been. I gave him my last name only. I signed the forms with a hand that still trembled. No father listed. No dramatic scene. Just a quiet decision in a too-bright room. The first 3 years were rough in the unglamorous ways nobody puts in cute parenting posts. My son had colic. I had stitches. The upstairs heat failed one winter, and I sat under 3 blankets nursing him while calculating whether I could afford another space heater. I went back to work too soon because rent does not accept emotional growth as payment. The downstairs woman watched him for what we both pretended was a symbolic amount, even though I know it inconvenienced her whole life. I packed bottles at dawn, decorated cakes until my lower back screamed, and came home to wash piping bags at midnight because buying new ones too often felt reckless. There was one awful afternoon when a supplier dropped the wrong order and I was late delivering a birthday cake to a woman who treated me like I had insulted her bloodline. I sat in my car afterward and cried, then laughed because what else was left? But little by little, private orders started showing up. A baby shower from someone at the bakery, a retirement party from the salon owner, a graduation order from one satisfied customer who posted a blurry picture on a social media app with a caption about how I saved the event. People started asking specifically for me. Not the bakery, me. My piping got cleaner. My prices got smarter. I stopped charging like a woman apologizing for taking up space. That part mattered more than I realized. By the time my son turned 3, I had scraped together enough savings to take a risk that made me nauseous. I rented a tiny commercial space at the edge of a strip of older storefronts, the kind with faded signs and a landlord who always smelled faintly like coffee and dust. It was not pretty. The back sink leaked. The front window had a crack in the corner, but it was mine in the way nothing had been mine for years. My own permits, my own account, my own recipes. I painted the walls myself while my son sat on the floor with crayons and narrated the entire process like a tiny foreman. Later, when a tiny apartment opened above the shop, I moved there to save money and stay close. Rebuilding the business I lost in the divorce felt less like revenge and more like recovering a language I had been forced to stop speaking. I worked insane hours. I made mistakes. I underquoted one wedding and nearly took myself out over the math. I forgot to order enough butter before a holiday weekend and had to beg another local baker for help. I burned out twice and kept going because there really was no dramatic alternative. Nobody was secretly funding me. Nobody was arriving with a miraculous check. It was just me learning, adjusting, failing in public, and getting up again because my son needed shoes in the next size and because I was too stubborn to let my old life be the final draft of me. My friends stayed in constant contact, taking my late-night calls about clients who wanted custom work on grocery store budgets. She and the downstairs woman were the only people who knew the full story and why certain dates still made me weirdly mean. She also knew not to say my sister's name unless necessary. And years later, when my sister showed up at my shop, she was still my first call. I still got updates, of course. Families leak. My sister and my ex kept posting a version of domestic happiness that looked romantic from far away and rotten up close, while my mother kept trying to send me holiday photos as if time had turned treason into awkward history. I never answered. The real shift came when people with better budgets started noticing my work. Not fancy in a movie rich, just the regular upper-middle-class kind of customer who expects things on time and pays for not having to worry. School fundraisers. Boutique opening parties. Small weddings in renovated barns and hotel event rooms. I got good at elegant without making it look stiff. I got even better at managing clients without letting them smell fear. One woman hired me for her daughter's engagement party and then recommended me to her coworker, who recommended me to somebody planning a corporate reception. Suddenly I was making desserts for rooms full of people who wore nicer watches than I would ever buy, and complimented my sugar flowers like they were discussing fine art. I still came home to a little apartment above my shop's back alley parking lot, still scrubbed pans by hand some nights, still wore old sneakers with flour ground into the seams. But something had shifted. Survival was slowly becoming stability. Not peace, exactly. I do not think peace shows up all at once. It arrives in tiny receipts. Rent paid on time, a child with enough winter clothes, a savings account that no longer looked like a joke. The first month I realized I had gone several whole days without thinking about my ex-husband, I almost cried from the relief of that alone. 5 years after I left my old city, I could finally say out loud that my life looked decent without feeling like I was tempting fate. My son was in preschool, obsessed with dinosaurs, construction vehicles, and asking deeply personal questions in grocery lines. My shop had steady event work. I had a bookkeeper for a few hours a month because I had learned the hard way that "I'll just handle it myself" is not a personality. It is a cry for help. I had seasonal help, though I still did most of the detailed decorating because trust is hard and my standards had become slightly unhinged. That was the season, with my son 4 and in preschool, that I took a contract for a corporate reception downtown. It was for some regional healthcare event, the kind where everyone says networking like it is weather. I almost turned it down because corporate people can be weird about food. But the budget was good, and I wanted to replace my mixer before it died in my arms. So I built a dessert table that looked polished enough to make strangers think I had my entire life under control. He noticed the pistachio glaze first. That is how absurdly specific this whole thing is. He came up while I was fixing one tray and said very casually that most places overworked that flavor, and mine tasted balanced. I looked up ready to give some polite vendor smile, and there he was in a dress shirt with rolled sleeves, holding a plate he had clearly intended to fill more discreetly. He told me he owned a small network of dental clinics in the region. Not in a flashy way. Just a fact. He knew enough about food to ask real questions, which I found suspicious at first because men who ask informed questions while staring respectfully are often hiding something. I say that with love and experience. He asked if I handled all the designs myself. I said mostly. He asked if I did private events outside the city. I said yes. He asked if I would maybe want to talk sometime about future work for company functions. I said sure. Then he did something unexpected and did not immediately get weird. No pressing, no fake charm. He took one of my cards, thanked me, and walked away. We ended up having dinner 2 weeks later after he emailed about a smaller office event, and then, in the least offensive way possible, asked if I would let him buy me a meal either with or without a dessert logistics discussion attached. I almost said no on principle because my instincts had become the emotional equivalent of a smoke detector that goes off when you make toast. But my friend told me I had to stop acting like every decent conversation was a trap. She was only slightly judgmental about it, which for her counted as restraint. Dinner was easy in a way that made me nervous. He was divorced, no children. He spoke about his ex without either bitterness or fake saintliness, which felt adult in a way I was not used to. He asked about my son directly instead of pretending I had some mysterious off-screen life. I told him the truth, though not all of it. I said I had been married before, that it ended badly, and that my son's father was not part of our lives because I chose not to keep that door open. He did not interrogate me. He just nodded and said, "That sounds like there was probably a reason." Reader, I almost married him on the spot for that sentence alone. It still moved slowly. I made sure of that. I was not interested in building another life on top of adrenaline and denial. He started by dropping by the shop toward closing time under embarrassingly transparent excuses, like needing to confirm dessert counts for events that were already confirmed. Then he started bringing my son small things that were thoughtful without being too much. A dinosaur puzzle, a book about space, sidewalk chalk. He never tried to buy affection with flashy gestures, which mattered. Kids can smell that kind of performance. The first time he met my son properly, it was at a park, in daylight, with me sitting close enough to intervene if anything felt off. My son spent the first 10 minutes ignoring him and the next hour making him inspect sticks. When we got back to my car, he asked if the dentist man was coming again. I said maybe. He said okay and then fell asleep on the ride home with mulch in his shoes. That was basically how the relationship developed. Not through some cinematic spark, but through repetition, reliability, and the shocking novelty of a man whose actions lined up with his words. I should tell you I was not graceful about any of it. I picked fights when I felt vulnerable. I went cold for no reason after good dates because intimacy made my skin itch sometimes. Once I accused him of being too calm during a disagreement, which is not a real crime, but I said it like it should be. He looked at me for a second and said, "I think maybe chaos used to feel more familiar to you than calm." I hated him a little for being right. Then I cried in his car while holding a takeout container. Again, not glamorous, but honest. It took 8 months before I agreed we were officially serious, and even then I said it like I was signing a liability waiver. He did not push for more than I could give. He also did not pretend dating me was somehow noble. I cannot stand that. He liked me. He liked my son. He liked my work ethic and my sarcasm, and apparently even the way I muttered under my breath while loading catering trays. I did not have to perform gratitude for being chosen. That changed me more than I realized in the moment. By the time a year and a half had passed, He had become part of our routine in a way that felt earned. My son started asking if he was coming to school events. He fixed a broken cabinet in my apartment without making a speech about being the man around here, which should honestly disqualify half the male population from home improvement. He sat with me through tax panic. He picked up soup when I got sick. He learned exactly how to carry tiered cakes without me having to bark directions more than once. All of that sounds small, and that is precisely why it mattered. Big declarations are easy. Showing up for ordinary life is the hard part. He proposed in my kitchen while I was wearing flour on my cheek and complaining about vendor pricing. No restaurant violin, no hidden photographer crouching behind a shrub. Just him saying he loved the life we had already been building and wanted to keep doing it on purpose. I said yes, then immediately asked if he was sure because apparently self-sabotage is a hobby. He laughed, which helped. We kept the wedding simple. My son wore a tiny tie and spent half the ceremony looking deeply bored, which still makes me smile. My friend stood beside me. The downstairs salon woman came too and cried harder than either of us. My parents were not invited. My sister was not invited. I did not make a public issue of it. I just built the guest list around people who had not betrayed me. It ended up being refreshingly short. Marriage with him was not perfect because that is not a real thing, but it was stable in a way I had stopped believing I qualified for. 3 years in, my son was calling him dad without anyone forcing the shift, and that hit me harder than I expected. I went into the pantry and cried quietly over paper towels, which seems to be where many of my emotional milestones happen. We talked once about formal adoption, but I did not want to stir up legal complications with a man who had stayed gone, and he did not need paperwork to act like a parent anyway. The real thing had already happened in practice. Life got comfortable, not mansion comfortable, just the regular kind where the bills get paid, the fridge stays stocked, and you stop flinching every time the phone rings. We bought a house with enough kitchen space for me to test recipes without swearing at the walls, and the downstairs salon woman still sends my son a birthday card every year. He grew his clinics carefully and eventually started talking about supervising other cities himself. One of them was the city I had left years before. The first time he mentioned it over dinner, my fork stopped halfway to my mouth. He saw it immediately and said we did not have to discuss it again if I did not want to. That is the thing about being loved properly. It does not corner you and call that intimacy. I told him I would think about it, and I did, more than I wanted to. Around the same time, 3 years into my second marriage, through the kind of gossip that finds you, I learned my sister was 7 months pregnant. Someone I knew from the old city posted a shower picture, and there she was in the corner with one hand on her stomach, smiling the way people do when they need a photo to prove something is fine. My mother had a hand on her shoulder. My ex-husband was off to the side, pretending to look supportive. I stared at that picture much longer than I cared to admit. Not because I missed any of them, because some old bruise in me hated that they were still out there making family portraits out of the wreckage they left me in. A week later, my husband had to make a trip to that city for work, and he asked if I wanted to come for one night, stay in the hotel, have a nice dinner, maybe prove to myself the place no longer owned me. I said yes before I could overthink it, which either showed growth or a temporary lack of judgment. Probably both. Going back felt strange before it felt dramatic. The roads looked smaller. Even the air outside the hotel smelled like old versions of myself. By evening, I was in that brittle state where you seem normal, but one weird look from a stranger could probably crack you open. We had dinner in the hotel restaurant because his day ran late and neither of us felt like going anywhere complicated. It was one of those places trying very hard to be sophisticated with dim lighting and tiny plates. I was halfway through making fun of the portion size when I looked across the room and saw my ex-husband at a corner table with a woman who was definitely not my sister. There are shocks that feel loud and shocks that happen in total silence. This was the second kind. My body recognized him before my thoughts did. The shape of his shoulders. The way he leaned in when he wanted someone to feel like the only person in the room. The casual hand near her wrist. She was younger than us, or at least looked younger, laughing with her whole face open while he sat there in the same posture he used to use when he was manufacturing intimacy on purpose. My husband noticed something changed in me and followed my line of sight. I told him quietly that the man across the room was my ex. He looked back once, then asked if I wanted to leave. I should have said yes. That would have been healthier, cleaner, mature. Instead, I said, no, I want to stay. Because apparently some part of me had been waiting years for life to hand me exactly this kind of ugly symmetry. I did not make a scene. I did not throw water in his face or march over and announce myself. I took out my phone under the table and snapped pictures when I could. One of him smiling at her. One of her touching his arm. One of them leaving together with his hand on her back. I even stepped into the lobby on the pretense of taking a call so I could get a better shot when they walked out toward the parking lot. My husband did not stop me. He just watched me with that careful expression people wear when they know you are about to make a choice they cannot fully endorse but also cannot morally prevent. Back in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the photos while old feelings flooded in hard enough to make me nauseous. Not because I still loved him. That part was dead and buried. It was something meaner and more embarrassing than that. A mix of vindication, rage, and the kind of dark satisfaction you do not say out loud if you want to keep sounding evolved. My sister had helped him destroy my marriage and build her own life on top of it. My family had treated me like an inconvenience to their love story. And now there he was in a hotel restaurant acting like fidelity was still optional. Again. Of course. For 2 days after we got home, I argued with myself. One minute I thought I should leave it alone because I had my own life and did not need to crawl back into their mess. The next minute I thought about my mother comforting my sister at my dining table while I stood there in pieces, and all restraint evaporated. I knew exactly what I was doing. I do not need anybody's lecture on that. It was not altruism. It was not some sisterly warning rising nobly from the ashes. It was revenge wrapped in plausible deniability. I created a blank account on a social media app with no picture, no followers, nothing tied to me, and sent the photos to my sister with the hotel name, the date, and a short message saying she might want to ask her husband who he had dinner with while she was home pregnant. She saw it within 10 minutes. Her reply came fast and furious, calling it fake, pathetic, jealous, and twisted. I could practically hear her breathing through the screen. Then she blocked the account. Half an hour later, she posted a sappy photo of herself and my ex with a caption about protecting your peace from bitter people. It would have been almost impressive if it were not so stupid. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Pride has always been my sister's emotional religion, and I knew anonymous proof would never work because she would rather set herself on fire than admit I had been right about anything. So I did something pettier and much more effective. I sent the same photos to both my parents. Then I sent them to 3 women I knew were close to my sister, because back when families split, information gets weirdly democratic. Finally, I dropped them into the larger family group chat with one line that said, "Since everyone loves context now, here you go." My phone became a war zone almost instantly. My mother called first. I declined it. My father texted, asking if this was current. My aunt sent a shocked emoji, which felt very on brand for her contribution to any crisis. My sister called 8 times and left 2 voice messages that started angry and ended in tears. I listened to neither at the time because I was sitting on my kitchen floor again, same as years earlier, realizing that revenge is less triumphant than people imagine. It does not cleanse you. It just drags old poison through your system in a new direction. Apparently, the confrontation at their house was catastrophic. I learned the details later in fragments. My ex tried to say the woman was a client, then a coworker, then just someone from a meeting. The photos were too intimate for that lie to survive more than 5 minutes. My mother, to her credit, finally looked sick about something. My father asked him directly if there were others, and he made the tactical error of getting defensive before he got convincing. My sister screamed so hard a neighbor knocked. Very elegant, very domestic. And then, because life enjoys layering humiliation, the baby came early 3 weeks later. A healthy little boy, from what I heard, though the birth itself was stressful and my sister apparently spent part of labor crying about the state of her marriage between contractions. I only know that because one cousin tells everybody everything if you give her enough silence to fill. My mother sent me a picture of the baby from a number I had not blocked yet. I stared at it for a long time and felt absolutely nothing simple. He was innocent. He was also living proof that consequences keep arriving after the original betrayal has already gotten stale in everybody else's mouth. For a while, my sister tried to keep the marriage alive. That did not surprise me. When a person has burned down one life to build another, they become very committed to calling smoke a design choice. She posted little family moments, cropped carefully so you could not see whatever tension lived outside the frame. My ex started traveling for work more often. Again, not subtle. Apparently, fatherhood did not cure his addiction to being the center of some woman's temporary fantasy. When the baby was about 4 months old, my sister finally found what I had found years earlier: his unlocked phone and enough carelessness to collapse a life. Only this time it was worse. Not one woman, not one affair, several, different timelines, different tones, some sexual, some romantic, some purely financial, in a way that made the whole thing even more disgusting. And under all of it, another secret he had hidden well: debt. Big debt. Credit cards, personal loans, unpaid vendor balances, overdue rent on a commercial kitchen space he no longer used. The man had not just been cheating. He had been quietly sinking for a long time while performing normalcy on the surface. The separation was explosive. He left the house with a duffel bag and some paperwork before the week was over. My sister found out half their bills were either overdue or fake managed in ways that kept her from asking too many questions. One of the small kitchen spaces he had been using had already closed, and another account he depended on had changed hands. He had apparently started taking delivery work through somebody else to avoid creditors. The same family that once told me to calm down was now discovering that a charming liar does not suddenly become stable just because he switches sisters. I would love to say I watched all this with saintly detachment. I didn't. I watched with my jaw tight and a very ugly little voice in my head saying, yes, exactly, finally. Under that, there was recognition. I knew what it felt like to have your life collapse because the person beside you had been living a different truth the whole time. It did not make me want to help her. It just made everything uglier and more real. Within months, the collapse turned financial in the kind of way that stains everything. My sister sold jewelry, then furniture, then the nicer baby gear she had posted so proudly. She moved back in with my parents because the rent was behind and she had no way to catch up with an infant on one arm and creditors calling. My mother, who once told me not to punish her for one mistake, was now spending retirement money on formula and diapers while pretending this was all temporary. My father looked older in every picture that drifted across my screen through relatives. My ex-husband vanished the way weak men often do when their charm stops paying the bills. Different numbers, different addresses, contract work under other people. Always just out of reach enough to stay slippery. Again, I know how this sounds. It sounds like karmic justice tied up with a bow. It was not that neat. It was a baby with colic in my parents' cramped house. It was my sister working night shifts when she could find them. It was my mother making excuses through clenched teeth because admitting she chose wrong would have required a type of honesty she has never enjoyed. Real consequences are never aesthetic. They are ugly and repetitive and usually smell like warmed-over resentment and cheap detergent. A year and a half after my sister moved back in with my parents, she sent me the first message that did not sound like a threat, a defense, or a performance for somebody else. It came just after midnight, which is when people either get honest or dramatic, and with her, it had always been a coin toss. I almost did not open it. Curiosity got me. It was long enough that I had to sit down halfway through. She said she had replayed everything over and over and finally understood there was no version where what she did to me was just messy or complicated. She said she had told herself she was following love because facing the uglier truth would have meant admitting she wanted to win something, and I had been standing in the way. She admitted that being chosen by my husband had fed something mean in her, something competitive and childish and rotten that our mother had watered for years without ever naming. She said she was sorry for the affair, sorry for how our parents treated me, sorry for every time she let them make me the strong one so she could stay the precious one. She said becoming a mother had broken open parts of her she did not know were still dead. That last part annoyed me more than it moved me, which probably makes me sound cold. But there is something very convenient about gaining empathy only after your own life starts to hurt in matching places. I read the message twice. Then I set the phone down and went back to cleaning mixing bowls like she had sent me a weather update. She sent another the next day. Shorter, asking if we could talk. I said no. My parents started reaching out after that in a tone that made me laugh for all the wrong reasons. Suddenly there was language about healing, about family fractures, about nobody wins when sisters are divided. Interesting. I did not remember them using that energy when I was the one being pushed out of my own marriage and then out of the family orbit that enabled it. My mother cried on one voicemail and said she knew she had failed me. That was probably the closest she had ever come to a direct apology. And even then it was wrapped in the hope that I would relieve her of having to sit with it too long. My father called once and just said, "Your mother should have handled things differently, and so should I." He sounded tired. Old, even. I believed he meant it in the limited, late-arriving way some men mean things when enough time has stripped them of the illusion that passivity is neutrality. But belief is not the same thing as access. I told him I hoped they were all healthy and hung up before he could pivot toward reconciliation. Meanwhile, my sister's messages kept coming in uneven waves. Some were remorseful. Some were practical. One asked if I knew a decent family lawyer in her city because she needed to figure out support options and could not afford to waste time on bad referrals. Another asked if I had ever used a specific payment plan at the hospital because her son's ear infection had turned into a whole bill spiral. One night she sent a photo of her swollen feet after cleaning offices and wrote, "I know I deserve to struggle, but my son doesn't. That line sat in my head for days because it was manipulative and true at the same time, which is probably the most dangerous kind of sentence in family life. My friend, who has never been sentimental about blood, told me to keep my boundaries and sleep peacefully. My husband said he would support whatever I chose, but gently asked whether constant contact was hurting me more than helping anyone else. He was right, of course. Every time my phone lit up with my sister's name, some old version of me climbed halfway out of the ground. So I sent one clear message. I said I was sorry for her child because children do not ask to be born into their parents' bad decisions, but I was not available to rebuild a sister relationship, lend money, or function as emotional absolution for anybody in that house. I said I hoped she found a way to stabilize her life. I also said, and I meant this deeply, that consequences were not the same thing as cruelty. Sometimes they are just the shape of what happened coming back around. For a while, that quieted things. Not completely. Families do not know how to stop pressing on old bruises. But the pace slowed. I went back to work. My son got older in all the normal heartbreaking ways, outgrowing shirts overnight and asking better questions about everything. My husband remained exactly who he had been all along. Steady, observant, annoyingly decent. We traveled some for his work, and some just because we could. Nothing luxurious. Weekend cabins, little beach towns, places where my son could collect dumb souvenirs and I could eat dinner without checking the oven timer every 6 minutes. Then the resemblance problem happened. I do not plaster my child's face all over the internet because I am not interested in turning his life into content, but I do post occasional work photos, and once in a while he ends up in the edge of a picture helping me carry boxes or stealing a strawberry off a tray. Harmless little glimpses. There was one post after a school fundraiser where he was grinning in the corner with frosting on his nose, and apparently that was enough. My sister sent me a message that simply said, "How old is he exactly?" No greeting. No context. Just that. My whole body went still the second I read it. I knew immediately what she had seen, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. My son has my eyes and my stubborn mouth, but there are angles of his face, especially when he smiles sideways, that look like the man I married in my 20s. I noticed it when he was a baby and then trained myself not to stare at it too long. Children should not have to carry the shadow of the people who made them. I had made peace with that privately. I had not planned on explaining it to the woman who slept with his father. I did not answer. She followed up with 3 more messages in under an hour, asking his birthday, saying the timing felt wrong in her head all of a sudden, saying she had found an old picture of my son on the shop page and could not stop seeing similarities. Then came the one that changed the texture of everything. Did he do to you first what he later did to me? That question made me angrier than she probably intended, because of course he had done worse to me first. She knew that. She had participated. But underneath the anger, there was also something bleakly validating in the realization that she was finally, maybe for the first time, understanding the full scope of the man she had chosen over me. I took a day to answer because I did not trust myself. When I finally replied, I kept it brutally simple. I told her my son's age. I told her I found out I was pregnant after I left, while the divorce was still being finalized. I told her I did not tell our ex because I wanted a clean break and because by then he had already shown me exactly what he was. I also told her my husband, the man raising my son now, was his real father in every way that mattered. Then I put the phone down and took a walk around the block twice because my chest felt hot. She called. I declined it. She called again. Then came a long message full of disbelief, horror, and a kind of nauseated grief that almost reached me in spite of myself. She said she had been living with a man who abandoned one child while pretending to build a family with another. She said she kept thinking about how smug they both were when I left, how easy they made it sound, and now every memory from that time made her want to crawl out of her own skin. She asked if he knew. I said no, and I did not care whether he ever figured it out. She said she could not stop crying because her son had a brother out there and she had helped destroy the home that child might have had. I did not answer that part. It was too late, and not even really true. My son has a better home now than he would have had then. My ex was never going to become a better man just because fatherhood came in a different order, and that was not a bond she got to claim on demand. That revelation cracked open my parents in a way the affair alone never did. My mother called sobbing and said if she had known I was pregnant back then, maybe things would have been different. I asked whether they really would have, or whether they just would have found softer words for the same betrayal. Silence. Then more crying. My father sent the longest text of his life saying he had failed me, that he was ashamed he let me leave that first city with nobody from my own family beside me, and that he did not blame me for shutting them out. I believed he meant it. It also did not fix a thing. Around that time, my sister started sending photos of her son with little comments that tried to build a bridge through the children. I told her not to use our kids as emotional currency with me ever again. She apologized and stopped. What she did not stop doing was unraveling in messages. She wrote about working office cleaning shifts at night while our parents watched the baby. She wrote about falling asleep sitting up on buses. She wrote about sorting bills into piles called now, later, impossible. She wrote about my mother resenting the noise in the house and my father trying to make bottles at dawn with arthritic hands. She wrote about seeing women come into the clinic where she temped sometimes with husband problems and feeling like the universe was mocking her through paperwork. I read more than I should have. Sometimes I hated myself for that. Sometimes I hated her more. One night she wrote, "I think for the first time in my life, nobody is saving me." I stared at that message for a very long time because it was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. My mother had saved her from consequences. My father had saved her from discomfort. I had saved her from being the less favored daughter for years by taking the hit without even naming it. Even my ex, in his warped way, had saved her from seeing herself clearly for a while by making her feel chosen. Now none of that was working. She was finally standing in the full weather of her own decisions, and she did not know how to live there. I still did not offer help. That is important. Understanding is not the same as rescue. I was learning that too. The final in-person confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that makes everything look flatter than it is. I had just finished a pickup order for a school fundraiser and was standing behind the counter doing invoices when the bell over the door rang. I glanced up expecting a parent with last-minute panic in their eyes. Instead, it was my sister. I had not seen her face-to-face in years. Screens had done me a favor there. In person, the contrast hit hard enough to feel rude. She was thinner, tired in a way makeup cannot fake over. Her clothes were clean but worn at the edges, the kind of worn that tells you somebody is stretching everything. She looked older than me even though she is younger, and for one flashing second I hated that I noticed it like a victory. Then I hated that some part of me still wanted victory at all. She stood clutching a tote bag with both hands and said my name like she was not sure she still had the right to use it. I looked toward the back automatically where my husband was helping load trays for a delivery. He saw her, saw me, and gave the slightest nod that meant he was there if I needed him, but not about to manage my family for me. I asked what she was doing there. Not warmly, not cruelly, just flat. She said she had been in the area for a temp shift and almost turned around 3 times before coming in. She said she knew I told her not to push, but things had gotten worse, not better, and she did not know where else to go. Then she started crying before she even got to the actual ask, which was either strategic or just exhaustion finally spilling over. Probably both. I took her into the side room because I was not about to host our trauma reunion between cake stands. She sat on the metal chair like she expected it to reject her. Then she started talking in that fast, breathless way people do when they are terrified the person in front of them will cut them off before they finish. She said our father's health had been getting worse. Not catastrophic, but worse enough that he could not keep doing part-time repair jobs for extra money. She said our mother had become short-tempered and bitter in ways that turned the house into a minefield. She said daycare was out of reach and the night cleaning jobs were drying up because the company lost contracts. She had taken temp reception work when she could find it. But it was never enough, and half the time she had to choose between paying something late and paying something not at all. She said she was not asking me to forgive her. Then, almost immediately, she asked for 2 things that sounded an awful lot like she hoped forgiveness might be hiding inside them. A job, if I had any kind of position, even part-time, or a loan. Just enough to catch up 1 month of rent somewhere small so she could get out of our parents' house and stop drowning in front of her son. I let her finish. I let the silence sit afterward too, which made her talk again, this time softer. She said she knew she had no right to ask me for anything. She said she had spent years taking and being protected and calling that love. She said she hated who she had been when she thought being chosen by a man meant she had won something. She said if I turned her away, she would understand, but she needed to try because her son was starting to notice too much and she could not bear him growing up in that atmosphere. I believed parts of what she said, maybe most of it. That did not actually make the decision harder. It just made it sadder. I told her no. Not loud, not dramatic. Just no. No, I did not have a job for her because my business was not a family rehabilitation center, and because forcing myself to supervise my sister every day would poison the place I had built to survive her. No, I would not loan her money because I knew exactly how these stories go in families like ours. Need becomes entitlement in one conversation flat, and resentment comes right behind it. I told her I hoped she found work with steadier hours. I told her there were community resources for childcare assistance and housing lists and legal aid, and if she wanted the names of those programs, I would text them to her after she left. But I was not going to become the person who saved her from what she had helped do to me. She looked like I had slapped her, even though, to her credit, she did not argue much. She just asked once, very quietly, whether I ever thought there would be a point where we could be something other than this. I told her I did not know. That was the truth. People love neat endings where the hurt person either becomes generous and glowing or stays gloriously furious forever. Real life is mostly more annoying than that. Some days I felt nothing. Some days I still felt 19 different shades of anger before breakfast. Mostly I felt done. When she left the side room, my husband was pretending not to hover. He asked if I was okay after the front door closed. I said yes, and then, because honesty had gotten less terrifying over the years, I added that I also felt awful. He said those two things were allowed to coexist. Imagine that. Nuance. In a marriage. Revolutionary. I texted her the resource list that evening because I had said I would. Then I turned my phone face down and helped my son with a school project about local history that involved far too much glue and not enough patience. Later that night, after he was asleep, I stood in our kitchen while the dishwasher ran and looked around at the life I had now. My husband's mug by the sink, my son's backpack dumped in the wrong place, order forms clipped to the fridge, things nobody would film, things no one back in my old life would have found dramatic enough to protect. And yet these were the exact things I had fought hardest to keep. I still hear updates sometimes. My sister eventually found steadier office work at a clinic on the other side of town. My parents still help more than they can really afford. My ex-husband remains a rumor that pops up under new numbers and temporary jobs and then disappears again. My son is doing well. He is old enough now to roll his eyes when I fuss over his lunch, and young enough to still lean against me on the couch when he is tired. My husband is still his father in every real way, and that fact has settled into our house so naturally that it no longer needs defending. As for me, I do not wake up feeling haunted anymore. I also do not wake up feeling healed in some shiny, complete way, because that is not how this kind of damage works. I just feel like myself, a version of myself I had to build almost from scratch. Some losses still ache when the weather changes. Some memories still make my jaw lock. But I am not standing in that old kitchen anymore with somebody else's lies glowing in my hand. And my sister, for the first time in her life, is living without a net made of me. That is not revenge. Not anymore. It is just where the story landed when everybody finally had to live with what they chose.